Pushing this console switch on a Mercedes SL from the 90s activates a hydraulic pump under the spare tire, forcing fluid to this sophisticated latching mechanism just above the windshield. However, a small seal in the hydraulic cylinder can fail with age, requiring removal of this entire latch mechanism in order to replace it. With the top lowered, you can use a Phillips screwdriver to remove the latch plastic cover plates from the header bar cover. Pry them up out of the way on both the driver's side and the passenger side, and then remove the header bar cover. 3 T30 Torx head bolts hold the latch assembly to the windshield header bar. Use a small ratchet or breaker bar to break the 3 bolts loose, and then take the socket in your fingers and you can just spin the 3 bolts out quickly by hand. The hydraulic cylinder has both feed and return lines that will leak fluid when we remove them, so we're going to use a short piece of plastic tubing to seal it off rather than have it leak into the windshield header bar. Pry the hydraulic line attachment clips loose with a flat blade screwdriver, but be extremely careful that you do not lose these clips. They are springy and they will fly off out of your hands if you aren't careful. Hard to find, almost impossible to replace. Once the hydraulic lines are removed from the cylinder, slide the clear plastic tubing onto both sides very carefully, and this will keep the hydraulic fluid that will try to flow through from leaking down through the windshield header. You can unplug the electrical micro switch connector now and set that aside. With the 3 Torx head bolts removed and the hard hydraulic lines out of the way, we can now remove the entire top latch mechanism from the car. You now have some options on how to handle the leaking seal in the hydraulic ram. You could buy an entirely new unit or buy a rebuilt one. You could send yours out for a rebuild or rebuild it yourself with a new seal. You can also rebuild it using an O-ring. You could buy a used one from a salvage yard or simply never operate the top again. We're going to use an O-ring to replace the seal, which has pluses and minuses to it. A 4mm Allen wrench is used to remove the hydraulic ram from the latching mechanism. Now these 2 bolts are pretty tight in there, so you may have to use a clamp or a vise to hold it in order to get them out. Once the bolts are loose, you can easily remove them by hand and set them aside carefully, and then tilt the hydraulic ram up perpendicular to the latch mechanism. The latch mechanism has a square block and the rod has a square shank that perfectly accommodate open-end 7mm and 10mm wrenches in order to separate the 2 parts of the assembly. Now these 2 parts are firmly threaded together, so you may require a little force to separate them. Once you've got them loose, you can easily spin the hydraulic ram, the cylinder and rod away from the latch mechanism. Do not allow any scratches on this rod or the seal will always leak. The ram has an end cap that is held in by a small internal spring clip. I think you can kind of see it in here. We're going to have to pry that out. You and everyone in the room should wear safety goggles. As you pry and bend on this clip, it's going to come rocketing out of that cylinder at about 300 miles an hour, headed right for your face. So be very careful as you remove this clip out of the end of the cylinder bore. With the clip out, that end cap still has a tight fit, so I'm going to thread it back on the mechanism slightly to give me the leverage so that I can pull that whole assembly out of the hydraulic ram cylinder. Now let's take a look at the components that are inside that hydraulic ram cylinder. There's the aluminum cylinder, there's a rod and piston, a flat washer, a seal, and the end cap seal cup. A small screwdriver lets us pry out the factory seal, which is round but has a square section. These are an excellent design for what is known as a dynamic seal, something that has a part like a shaft that moves through it. 24 years old, this one has deteriorated and started to leak. The O-ring we are using is the same diameter, but it is thinner and it has a round section. Although it will seal well, it will not last as long as a dynamic seal with a moving part. Now is a good time to clean all of the parts, and I also want you to put a thin film of hydraulic fluid on everything so it doesn't start up dry the first time. So we'll put the O-ring into the seal cup, and then we're going to put that flat washer back on the seal cup, kind of keeping it all in, and then slide that whole assembly back on the piston shaft. We can then put it all back together, piston, rod, cup seal, into the hydraulic cylinder. The seal cup doubles as the end cap held in by that spring clip, and I'm going to use this 11mm deep socket to press it into the end of the cylinder. Now this is going to take some finagling and a lot of force, so let's make sure we get our safety goggles back on before we even start. Several minutes and 17 swear words later, we have that spring clip back in place, and our O-ring hydraulic ram cylinder is rebuilt and ready to reinstall. Now let's put it all back together by drying up any drips, and then we're going to place the top latch mechanism back into the windshield header area. Fully extend the actuator rod on the hydraulic ram so that we can thread it back into the attachment block on the latch mechanism. We're going to use our 7mm and 10mm open-end wrenches to tighten the ram back onto the latch mechanism. As we tilt the hydraulic ram back down, notice the numbers stamped on the cylinder. On the passenger side, the numbers 44 and 47 should be on top. These will coincide with the small tag on the steel lines, or you can trace it out to the distribution block in the center of the windshield header. Here I'm using a black marker to highlight those numbers on the distribution block and on the passenger side hydraulic ram. We can now reattach the hydraulic ram to the latch mechanism using our 4mm hex drive bolts. Now you can use a little of the blue type thread locker on them. Just make sure everything's very tight. I'm now ready to remove that clear plastic tubing. I'm just going to trim it away a little bit, and then we can insert the steel hydraulic lines into the feed and return ports on the hydraulic ram. Now on the spring clips we reattach the steel lines. One side is very slightly longer than the other side, so make sure that that one goes into the aluminum hydraulic cylinder body and the short side stays to the outside. The whole top latch mechanism fits into a cutout at the top of the windshield header bar. I'm going to start the 3 Torx head T30 bolts by hand. Again, you can use some thread locker if you'd like, but you definitely have to make everything tight. I'm going to reattach the electrical plug and then move over to the driver's side. This is going to be pretty much a repeat of the passenger side. Clean out the work area, make sure that you firmly attach the hydraulic ram to the latch mechanism, and be sure to orient the numbered ports on the hydraulic ram to match the driver's side steel lines. It's number 49 and 46 on top on the driver's side. I'm going to highlight these with a red marker. I'm ready to remove the plastic tubing that has kept the hydraulic fluid from leaking out, and then I'm going to position the hydraulic ram cylinder where I can put the steel lines in, and then I'll insert the clips and I'll use a pair of pliers to crimp those in firmly. Once again, a little blue thread locker isn't going to hurt as we put in our 3 T30 Torx drive bolts and tighten everything down firmly. I'm almost done, but right after I plug in the electrical connection, but before I put the header cover back on, I'm going to want to run a little test. With the cover still off, operate the top switch. You should see some movement but no leaks from the latch mechanism. On the driver's side, however, notice in the upper right, one of the steel lines is loose. So I'm back with the pliers to reseat all 4 lines on both sides. Once we're confident that the latch mechanism can move without the hydraulic ram or lines leaking, we can put the header bar cover back on the top of the windshield. Now, all of this leaking and testing since the beginning of the repair has probably left the hydraulic reservoir down a little bit from the top. So let's head back to the trunk, where under a plastic cover that's under the spare tire is the pump that runs the top hydraulic mechanism. Attached to this pump is a hydraulic reservoir that we're going to top up with some fluid. Big caution here, it is not brake fluid. Use only the official factory fluid from the Mercedes dealer or a hydraulic top fluid approved for this use. The lower line molded in the tank is the bare minimum, and the upper line is the maximum. Fill it up to the maximum line, but there's no reason to go above that. And that's all there is to your top latch hydraulic seal repair. Put the top back on the reservoir, put your spare tire back in the trunk, put the top down on your favorite roadster, and get ready to enjoy driving for the rest of the summer season and into the fall. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.